All right, so our panel discussion today is just focusing on general marketing topics for organic grains. We've had some great presentations today that have started some wonderful discussions. This is an opportunity to continue those discussions. So I have a few seed questions to get it started, but what we hope to have happen is a conversation between you and our panelists, expounding on their expertise, as well as the expertise we have here in the audience to explore what you have on your minds regarding organic marketing of organic grains. So the first question that I will put forth is for Andrea Hazzard. So your presentation talked a lot about the marketing that you do, but could you expound a little bit on the snapshot of the state of direct marketing grains? What is the marketplace like in terms of the demand? Where are you seeing the demand increasing? Who are your customers? You talked a little bit about CSAs and chefs, but could you go into a little more specifics? And I'd also like to say to the panelists, please make sure you use the microphone so that we can get your audio on the recording. Oh, yeah, let's sorry about that. There we go.
That's better. All right. I think that there's a lot of potential. I think that grocers and universities and schools, the farm to school movement doesn't include a lot of dry goods yet, but it sure could. And I think that there's a ton of opportunity in those spaces. And I think just in general, the movement is not going to stop. It is going to continue to grow. More and more people are going to get on board. It's still in, I don't know if I would say it's in an infancy stage, but I don't know. What do you feel like? 7-year-old?
We have a long way to go. I think if you look at the numbers, what dairy's 18 or so. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in, but if we look at as far as organic production and consumption goes, fruit, vegetables, and dairy are the leaders. 15+% of the total U.S. market share. But when you look at grains, it's about 0.25%. So we could quadruple this and still be in the 1% range. So we've got a long way to go to catch up with other industries.
When we started looking at milling grain and looking at what was happening elsewhere, the Hudson Valley in New York is 5 to 7 years ahead of where we are. And they've already got grain associations set up. Cornell, we got some seed from Cornell this last year, and we were out there, and the guys at Cornell said about 5 years ago, consumers really started clamoring at them that they needed to be looking at more than just a few oats for feed. Basically, they were looking at everything for feed. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Illinois, but they're coming along too now. But anyway, so we're 5 years behind the coasts, 7 years behind the coasts. So yeah, there is a lot of, I think a lot of upward momentum.
Did I answer the question?
Yes.
Does anybody want me to elaborate on it more? Okay. Yes.
What about the opportunities where there's not a lot of microbreweries and things popping up? What are those opportunities?
So I, several years ago, landed an account with Revolution Brewing in Chicago. So I sell grain to the kitchen. And because of that opportunity, I kind of started poking around about, so I see you have a small brewery inside where you're brewing small, really small batch beer. And they're like, yeah. So we got to talking about it, and I had grown malting barley, but couldn't find anyone to malt it. Now there are, Mammoth Malt is around now, and there's more small malting facilities popping up in other states. Illinois, I assume one will pop up more as we go on. I found a guy locally. He malted some of my barley. We did make beer out of it, and it tasted amazing. And it was, 4 years I'd been trying to make this project happen. And we're there now, so we did it. So there is a ton of possibility, and their interest as well, the malt store's interest was in not just my malting barley, because that's like a base malt, and then I would have to compete more with people like Breese Malting up in Wisconsin, but specialty malt. I grow grains that nobody else grows that we can malt and turn into beer. You know, it was like you with the foxtail malt beer.
Well, I was going to throw this in my presentation, but last year when I was running my rotary screen and we had grass seed, and I was thinking, I got to find a malter who would malt this and we could have foxtail ale. And I don't know a farmer in the world that wouldn't buy that stuff. So one other thing I wanted to mention about the demand for grains is probably all of us at one time or another in the next few years will be dealing with grocery stores. We're going to be working with a grocery store in Champaign. There's been interest by other grocery stores. One of the main reasons that we're in this going into the milling is Italy and Chicago. That will be a main account that we will be starting with the 1st of November. So, you know, these and these are going to pop up. You know, once one store does, one chain store does one, the rest of them are going to look at it too.
Yeah, a lot has to do with business models when you're talking about doing business with grocery stores. There's a huge amount of difference between talking to a co-op in Champaign and talking to Kroger's or Hy-Vee or the larger chain stores. How they buy, the business models of those main stores just don't work very well with the kind of business models we have. The cooperatives, the new restaurants coming on, like Sweet Green, is that the newest one I think that's coming down and is setting up in Chicago? They understand how to deal with local farms. And their business models work very well with ours. We can talk the same language. And when you have a store that you don't speak the same language they do, it's really hard to communicate. It's really hard to do business. I think we did business with Hy-Vee. They were buying from several local farmers, but corporate didn't know that. The local guy was buying it. That stuff was sitting in the fridge until it rotted because no one in the store knew it was there. And it was just one thing after another. The business models just didn't talk to each other. So as that changes, the opportunities expand a lot for produce, for grains, for anything that we're marketing from the farm.
I live in downtown Chicago, and it's really, when we moved downtown, it was 5 years ago, and there was really very little organic produce in the grocery stores down there. And there was only the big labels of milk or eggs. But that's changed in the last 5 years dramatically. And there's a growing number. People in Chicago, these young people are renting apartments for $3,000 a month. They can afford to pay more for fresh vegetables, organic vegetables, and specialty grains. And I think that you guys are like an hour away. It's got to be a slam dunk to get more people aware and educated that there is so much available here in Illinois. So I see this opportunity is immense, and there's people like me that are willing to pay good money for fresh vegetables, fresh meats, and fresh grains.
Yeah, and also as Amtrak comes online, moving produce, we have an expanded opportunity to get stuff all the way from St. Louis to Chicago in small amounts. So if you're a young person starting out, you can't possibly put together a semi-load of anything, but you just have a few boxes. There's a way you can get that to Chicago at a reasonable price. So this is in the experimental phase right now with West Gerald, Prairie Fruits Farm, doing that. And if that works out as hoped for, we'll be able to move our product on Amtrak, and Union Station will be a food hub in Chicago. So that's a big deal as far as moving product. And those are the kind of things that really put a crimp in or really help to make possible doing this.
Are there any questions or comments from any in the audience? No? Okay, so another question I have. I know that there are several people in our audience today who are from states and regions other than Illinois and central Illinois. What are some resources for growers in other regions that you may be aware of, or how can they find out about those resources? And I'm talking about trading companies or locations that they can drop off product that is organic or identity preserved, et cetera. Does anyone feel they have the expertise to speak to that?
The internet's incredible for getting information out there, so there's a lot of resources. You can go to a lot of different websites. I know that Moses as an organization is one of the longest standing out there that does a nice job bringing people together and distributing information. I think from a show of hands, most people are Midwestern here, so when we talk about trading, and I know All-Star and everybody else that's in this market is not bound by state lines. I mean, everyone's pretty well moving their product across multiple states. So I think that trend will probably continue. As everyone's talked about, your main consumption centers are in urban areas and on the coasts. Your main production centers are in the Midwest. And there goes your food box, Dave. So there's a lot of resources online. Check the Land Connection website, and if anyone's coming up short on something, just pop an email, and I'm sure that you can find answers.
There's a big food show in February called familyfarmed.org. That's what you can go and look for information, but it's a lot of the chefs from Chicago will attend it, put on little demonstrations, but it is a big resource. I know a lot of farmers from Iowa and other states have gone to this. It's at the University of Illinois Circle campus. It's at one of their facilities. So go to that website, and you can a lot of information online, and by attending it, you can make some connections there.
A question that I often get from young/new farmers is, not a question, but a comment that they often give is that it's very heartening and uplifting to find out that people who are experienced have experienced setbacks and catastrophes, that these are just bumps in the road and that they are overcomable, to speak, what's his name, Danish? Danglish. Could you possibly expand on some bumps in the road that you have experienced? I know that some have come out in presentations so far, but for newer growers out there, what are ways that you overcame those obstacles, and what did you learn from them? And could you share some of your bumps? Anyone? Yay!
So I'm a really new farmer. This is my first year. And we're in first year transition. I also get the privilege of being an agronomist. I go around and I get to see a bunch of other farmers, which really helps when trying to figure out what I plan to do on my own farm. And well, I graduated college and I was really interested in no-till organic agriculture. And Jackie back there, she owns the ground, and that's what her dream was too, was an organic no-till farm. So looked online, I found some things and read a couple books, and everything looked really great on paper. So I decided, sure, let's go ahead and try it. And me and a couple other guys built our own roller crimper, and I thought I had the crimping of the rye timed right. I was probably a little too antsy and jumped the gun some. So my weed control was phenomenal. I got a lot of rye out there too. So it'll be a nice stand of rye this fall coming into next year, and plan to harvest that. So that was one thing that a lot of these guys up here told me was take advantage of missed opportunities. Things change. You need to be able to roll with the punches.
So this was a very painful lesson early on in my organic career. And, you know, we didn't have an overabundance of money when I did this and went into organics. And, you know, you got to make your wife happy too. But that's not what I'm going to talk about. But I was on third year organic transition, and I got in some teff seed, and you know, it was going to be organic coming up the next year. I got some teff seed, and it had a coating on it, and it was a lime-based coating, and it came out of Pennsylvania. And I called the company, and they shipped it, and it had this coating on it. I go, hey, wait a minute, it's got a coating on it. Oh, don't worry, I've been selling it to organic farmers all over the eastern seaboard, and no worries, I've been, you know, and nobody's had any problems. I had a problem. It had blue coloring, and the blue dye that they used was not approved for organics. So here I was with 80 acres that I had to start over transition. And you talk about hurt. It's when you're in your third year of transition and you got to start over again. And after that, I don't use anything that isn't my own, or I haven't checked to make sure for sure with my certifier that it's approved. That is the ultimate sin. And if you're transitioning, find a certifier. You got any questions on non-GMOs or treatments or whatever, make sure that they approve it.
I guess I'll reiterate something Andy might be getting ready to say, but she said earlier is about knowing how much risk you can absorb and how much risk you're willing to take on. And as a producer myself who's getting established, I've got some transitional ground that's in alfalfa this year, and if anyone's been doing any haying, you know that 2016 has been a really tough year for hay production. It's rained more frequently than I ever recall. So I guess we'll see how it all turns out. Everything is up, fingers crossed, but that's enough hay for me. I've decided after this week that you know, once it's transitioned and in-row crops, okay, I'll feel comfortable doing more hay, but just knowing your limits, don't go all in with one thing. Spread your risk out, and if you've got, if you have to split a field or split a farm and spread that risk out a little bit, if you do have a failure on one, you're not kind of all in on one thing.
Timmy, door.
So a couple of things, and that risk thing is one of them. You know, you might be willing to risk a lot, but can you afford to make big mistakes? And this comes from a vegetable farm thing, but it was kind of like, you know, the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt grow no less than 10 different crops. Being because if something gets screwed up, you're only losing 10%. And I think still that's a really good rule. When you incorporate that rule on a grain farm as opposed to a vegetable farm, it gets a little hairy because that is a lot of different grains to manage and dry and process and store. So I might bring that number down a bit, but I do think it is a good rule that spreading your risk out, don't put all your eggs in one basket, and then, you know, as we've bought more equipment and I've acquired things, and the gravity table like being a big one, the infrastructure for the gravity table, by the time it's all said and done, is going to be like half of the cost of the gravity table. You know what I mean? Because all of a sudden now we need, oh, well, what we really need is 4 augers coming off this thing. We need one going in, we need the bulk tank, we need some more air aspiration on it. Oh, it's kind of tall. We need to build, you know, catwalks all the way around it. It's just one thing after another with the new equipment. And so, and you will attest later, I'm sure, to the milling operation and getting everything set up in such a way that it makes sense. And you're not, you know, running around, moving crops around all over the place. And if you don't like challenges and obstacles, please think twice because every day is another one. And the farm is so complicated. Farms are incredibly complicated organisms. And we know this. Even the simplest thing that you've done 100 times can totally go wrong, either weather or, equipment or whatever. So I think that's just be ready for lots of learning. Lots of learning.
My son came back, wanted to come back to the farm 5 years ago, and we had to try to figure out how to reincorporate a second generation in there. I would say the hardest thing to get out of their heads, young people, is that you actually have control over anything that really matters. Because I assure you, you don't. I think back in my own experience, 1987. I had the best soybeans I ever had in my life. Neck high, potted all the way to the top. We thought it was going to do 70 bushel, right? And in 1987, nobody ever heard of 70 bushel. Feeling pretty good about myself. The night before harvest, we literally had the combine in the field. The night before harvest starts to rain. It rained for 10 days, and the temperature was in the mid-80s. And those beans started to sprout in the pod and pop out on the ground. We got back in the field, we had 30 bushels of something that no elevator wanted. That is a humbling experience. In 1988, it did not rain between the 1st of April and the 1st of November. And the psychological impact of watching something die that slowly in front of you, day by day by day, is really tough to communicate. You have to experience some of those things. And if you farm for 35 years, I promise you, you will experience some of those things. That can be really debilitating to young people who think that, corn's never going to drop below $5 no matter what, and you're never going to see a real drought, you will. And are you going to have the wherewithal to weather those things? Do you have not only the resources, do you have the psychological resources to do that? And, I hear young people talking some days and I think, that's going to hurt, right? Well, sooner or later, that's going to hurt. But the only alternative to getting older is to die young, right? So, hey, you do what you got to do.
In our case, it was 160 acres of pumpkins, and we're still suffering the effects on that field weed-wise, and it's going into wheat this fall, and it's going to be in alfalfa at least for 1, maybe 3 years. But we got to clean it up. But we thought, we had 80 acres of pumpkins the year before, and, that was a pretty good crop. Didn't have to harvest it ourselves. Great idea. And then the next year, it rained the day after they planted them, and never quit raining for a month. And then we tried to get out and cultivate them, and by that time the grass was taller than the cultivator almost, and it was a disaster. And of course, all of my neighbors couldn't wait for that one because, the one thing about being an organic farmer in Iroquois or in Danforth Township, if you win and it looks good, you were lucky. If it doesn't work, you're a bad farmer. Yeah.
Well, speaking for the younger people in the world, I tell you a little about myself. I'm new to Eastern Illinois. I moved here from the Quincy area. I lived in Pike County for 5 years where I farmed 3 acres of vegetables. My first year of farming was the drought of 2012, and my last year of farming was the flood of 2015. So I've had my hard knocks, and I have been majorly humbled by them. So thank you for your words of wisdom. Are there any thoughts or comments, questions from anyone in the audience? I have exhausted my personal question list, so I would love to open this up to a wider discussion. Thank you.
I'm going to direct this at Dave. I'm not sure if the other growers up here do larger scale produce, but I'm just interested in how you've factored that into your grain operation or your livestock operation, how to fit produce in.
When my son decided he would like to come back to the farm, the obvious question was, well, how do we reintegrate this? And we had at that time a very, very small half-acre size vegetable enterprise. And that's what he wanted to do, so we decided that the logical thing would be for him to take over that enterprise. And you can manage it yourself, make your own mistakes. I'm not going to be standing over your shoulder looking at you all the time. And that worked out probably better in my case than if I had tried to consider him an employee. How you reintegrate that, I think that the more diversity you've got in an operation, the better off you are. It's easier to do vegetables if you have a larger land base so that you can rotate fields out of vegetable production for a number of years. And it also just fits in well. Machinery-wise, a lot of vegetable operation occurs at times when the grain operation isn't using that equipment. And so it's fairly complementary. But the big thing really, to me, was somehow we've got to figure out how to make this multi-generational thing work, or the farm eventually grinds to a halt, no matter what it's doing. So I don't see vegetables as difficult to incorporate into a grain operation. I think there are some significant advantages to that. I think if you add livestock to that, you have a lot more advantages. And in hoop houses, for example, you have to rotate out of vegetable production if you're not going to use, serious chemicals to take care of the problems in the soil. There you can use livestock, chickens particularly. You can raise chickens all year round in a hoop house. It's a high-value crop. It gives you a way to get out of vegetable production for a while without sacrificing income. So the more diverse you are, vegetables, grains, meats, eggs, honey, as many things as you can think of. The more successful you're going to be and the less subject to catastrophic loss. Diversity is the best crop insurance you can buy. I don't know if that answers your question.
What scale is your produce operation?
Currently, it's 15,000 feet of hoop house space, 20 acres of vegetables.
How do you deal with the labor issue? I mean, well, you got a lot of interns that carry the load, because that's always been, anytime we start looking at the vegetable thing, it's just trying to buy into that labor market that's not there anymore.
How do we deal with labor issues? Yeah, it's very labor intensive. We have 4 internships a year, and we do have an old farmhouse that's set up so that they can live on site. We provide them with a stipend and with food and lodging. That's kind of critical because if you have to depend on people who live nearby for interns, you're not, these people come from all over the country, in some cases all over the world. We do have about 3 full-time and about 6 part-time employees in addition to that. So, yeah, labor is a big issue. It's a major management problem. Not everybody works out, especially within interns are not profit centers. Believe me? Okay. Understand that before you take on any kind of arrangements of that nature. But that is a big issue. Each year we try to mechanize as much as possible. So we're trying to find that balance between, well, we can mechanize, how much can we afford to pay on machinery, how much are we better off to spend on labor? No easy answer to that question. But the market has been supportive of that effort. And you have to understand what price you have to get to make that work. And as long as you can get that price, you're good. When you can't get that price, then you have to start all the way to the beginning and start scaling back. And labor comes in right at the top of the list.
Any other comments, questions, thoughts? Yes.
So the question from Ted is, where are we at with the transitional market? And Ted has some more knowledge of this because he's a neighbor of Clarkson, and there's been a lot of talk about it, and it's a slow mover. So long story short, the concept is that if consumers wish to buy something that supports the transition to organic, they're still buying something that's been raised under organic rules, free of prohibited substances, might be able to buy it at a cheaper price point, and at the same time be supporting more acreage coming into production. It seems like a win-win-win for everybody. So Lynn Clarkson has made it his mission over the past year to, one, push this through the government channels so that it's recognized by USDA, and two, push this into grocery shelves so that consumers have that choice. It has been quite a slow mover for a number of reasons, primarily because if you're an organic brand, just pick on a national organic brand, and you're processing all organic products, how can you introduce a non-organic product into your plant? Even if it was raised under organic conditions, it's still not certified, and that causes issue for their production. If you're a non-organic brand and you're trying to introduce an organic product, why would you not just go all the way with an organic? And so it's a literally chicken and egg issue. The other issue is, how do you balance rotation? We'll pick on tortilla chips. That's an easy one. Everyone eats tortilla chips, and that would be an easy one to get a transitional program on. Okay, what then do you do with your soybeans? We were talking earlier, and there's only so much demand for soybeans for human consumption in the U.S. So my bias right now is that we need to see an animal feed market. I will say that there is an East Coast poultry company that has shown a lot of interest in it, because their goal is to bring more organic land into production. And they're saying, one, we can push this into supermarkets at a cheaper price point than our organic birds. They're having a lot of success with their ABF birds, the antibiotic-free birds, and so they're looking at this very seriously as a way to add value, gain their own market share, and then in turn have more acres available in a few years. So I do know of a couple of transitional contracts that were made earlier this year. And I won't ask with who, but has anyone in here been able to contract for an organic or transitional premium? Okay, so it has happened. There are a few out there. I'm pretty sure I know where it's going, but I don't want to say, because I know there's been a couple of them. But the quick take is, if you have ground in transition, keep that crop isolated if you can. There still might be a bid for it, but certainly don't hold it till next year at this time and hope. And if you do have ground in transition, let your buyers know. Whatever market you normally go to, make them aware of that, so that if that call comes in and someone says, "Hey, we're ready to buy transitional," then okay, we know what's available. So I hope I answered it, Ted. I don't know if that's what you wanted to hear, but that's what's going on.
There are several facilities that are making non-GMO soybean meal, so they are taking like a non-GMO soybean, which would be a transitional soybean. It would fit into that category. You have to be close to one of these facilities in order for it to make it work. But one of them was paying $1 over the board, which was better than most places where you can get a transitional feed. I've moved them several times. There's a big, somebody's doing non-GMO corn milling. I'm not sure, it might be, Cargill might be doing it on the East Coast. Okay, I did hear about Bunge, and somebody else is doing it in Hammond. Who's in Hammond? I forget. Cargill? Yeah. So I think there's going to be more opportunities. You're not going to get the organic price unless we can find somebody who's feeding their organic cows and they're not telling anybody that they're buying the transitional grain to feed them. So.
One of the things I'd like to work on once we get the mill up and running is one of the biggest concerns I hear from bakers, and you can chime in with this, Andy, is about the spraying of the wheat right before harvest out west, especially in the hard red winter wheat areas and the hard red spring wheat. And so what I've been hearing is if we could make a transitional product that would get even close somewhere to the price of what they're paying for that out west and trucking in here, that there would be a demand for transitional grain, wheat especially, as an AP flour that then they know was not sprayed. And so that's something that I would like to explore. First thing, we got to get our boots on the ground, and then I can look at things like that.
Yeah, I would second that because we're doing so much education. People say, "Oh, wheat's GMO, wheat's GMO." No, it's not GMO. It is sprayed, however, with fungicides, and a lot of people burn it down at the end of the season with Roundup. A lot of people don't know that. They don't know that wheat is sprayed. And then when the research came out on the German beers, did anyone see that? They tested like the top 10 beers selling in Germany, all tested positive for Roundup. And the government is going to start testing for Roundup in food. They never have before. So I think as this comes forward in the next few years and people realize how much herbicide is in their food, there's going to continue to be a greater and greater push for, and the transitional thing, what they're doing, it is a complete marketing thing. It just needs to be marketed right. The consumer needs to understand that you're helping the farmer. You and the farmer are working together to take land, out of conventional production, no chemicals. And that feel-good story just needs to be marketed the right way, and it can be absolutely branded. And I guarantee there would be people that would only buy the transitional because they know when they do so, more farms will reach organic status and go on, and more new farms will become transitional, and that's what they want to see. It's just marketing. It's totally marketing.
Okay, are there any other thoughts or comments?
I don't know, Mike, but I just want to ask, the government keeps saying that glyphosate is safe, and what's the evidence otherwise?
Who feels they can speak on that issue?
Well, I can tell you there's more and more studies coming out that dispute that. And, this comes up all the time with GMOs, with various chemicals, if you start arguing the science, and I have to say, I am not a scientist. I am not going to get into an argument with you on the science of GMOs or pesticides or anything else. But I can tell you that, first of all, that science is not entirely in agreement on that. And the second thing I can tell you as a farmer is that if I'm not raising what my customer wants to buy, I'm soon going to lose that customer, regardless. And so we spend too much time, I think the industry directs us to a safety issue because they can dispute that. But for us, this is about, are we growing what our customer wants to buy or are we not? And it doesn't matter. If we're not producing what the customer wants, we are going to be gone.
So glyphosate specifically was originally patented as a chelator. And then that was later used after World War II to become a herbicide. And the way it works is it ties up minerals in the plant and it shuts down pathways and processes in the plant. It works not only in plants, but it can work in soils, and it can work in your bodies, and it can work anywhere it comes in contact with elements. So it does have actually a lower acute toxicity than table salt. So in its natural state, if you go ahead and drink it, you won't get sick right then. But I've never tried it. But it can tie up the minerals in your body, which then could have later chronic effects.
I have just a couple of thoughts, and I am in total agreement when you say we just are growing what people want. The other issue is that no matter the scientific discovery, it could be CRISPR, GMO, Roundup, other chemicals, Mother Nature will inevitably push her way around. And all we have to do is look at all of our super weeds that we have now. If everyone hadn't been consistently using Roundup, if they would switch their fields on and off, okay, this year we're going to do some cultivation. We're starting to see weed pressure. We're going to put in a non-GMO. We're not going to spray it. You could have kept the susceptibility to Roundup in the weed. Does that make sense to anybody? We bred it out. We squeeze it. And she will go around it in every way, shape, and form. And the CRISPR thing is interesting because it's a complicated thing. Do read up on it. But I believe that technology was used in South America somewhere to make modified mosquitoes that were sterile. They were sent out to breed with females and then no offspring, right? There is some evidence that suggests that those genes moved. They're transposons, basically. They can move around, and it may be one of the things that caused Zika virus. Now, I know that's like a long jump, but nature is complicated, and I've been reading about the CRISPR thing because it's in the organic stuff, and we don't understand. We're not that smart. And every time we do one of these things, 5, 10, 15 years down the road, now we have a whole new set of problems which science is going to solve. And science solves a lot of things. And one of the reasons that people are very good at organic farming now is because of science. We understand what the weeds are telling us. We understand way more about breeding and cultivation and rotation. And these are the things that make us able to farm organically and be profitable, more profitable by far than conventional. And that was just a passing thought that it's just a choice you got to make. Do you want to spray chemicals or do you not want to spray chemicals? Do you want to consume them and take them into your body and assume everything's all right, or do you not? And we as Americans think, well, if I put this cream on, it'll go in my skin and it'll make my aches and pains go away. But if I put this chemical on me, I'm just going to assume it's not going to get in my body. And it's totally crazy. We are bags of water, and chemicals can pass in and out of us and everything else on Earth. And I don't know. Hopefully I didn't ramble too much.
Speaking of Roundup, as an orchardist, growing an orchard, you get to see things. It's a permaculture, and a modified permaculture, that's called. And you get the advantage of seeing things from year to year that you don't in a row crop situation, because you kind of remember how your corn crop was last year, but you put soybeans in it, and you don't see what the long-term effects of chemicals are, even in transition. I mean, things get better, and you know that things get better, but the thing that, and I'm just talking about our own experience in transition from orchards that were 20 years in conventionals, and in conventional orchard you spray the understory with Roundup to knock back the weeds, because you don't want an understory, because you don't want weeds, grass, etc., competing with your apple crop. Easier to keep, et cetera, et cetera. There are a million reasons. Anyway, the transition process we have found has taken almost 5, even though we didn't start the official organic transition for 3 years, and we're now organic in terms of orchard. We started the transition the year before that, which was the last time that we started the last time the Roundup was sprayed in the orchard. And just as a casual observer, and I think as an organic farmer, you're always observing the cycles of nature. It has taken 4 years for those trees to come back around, because that Roundup has affected the biology of that tree and that tree root, and its surrounding environment. And first you get these weird weeds that you never see, and then as the soil gets better, those weeds disappear, other weeds show up, and pretty soon you begin to see this resurgence of beneficials that come back that weren't there before because they've got some habitat. But it's an amazing thing to see it in a permaculture kind of thing that you don't normally see in an annual crop situation. And believe me, Roundup has really absolutely changes biological environment in a thing, whether it's a cornfield or things, and people just don't know it because it hasn't collapsed on us yet.
Yes, we've observed the same thing. We are about to propose next week, as a matter of fact, to the USDA an alternative path to transition that is a 5 to 7 year transition, and it's a step down rather than a cold turkey process. Do you think that people would generally have a higher success rate with a longer step down process than a shorter cold turkey process?
I think you're going to prolong your soil from making the full jump. I'm along with Michael. I've said a number of times we're organic in 36 months, marketing wise, but our ground takes 5 years, and that's stopping. Or in our case, we've taken on a number of farms. One in particular this year that was no-tilled for over 20 years. We got button weeds out the yin-yang, excuse me. But anyway, we got button weeds. Well, button weeds is nature's radish, okay? There's so much compaction underneath that ground that you couldn't put a probe in there if you wanted to. And, you'd have to take a hammer to drive the screwdriver in. And so Mother Nature sends or not activates weeds that it needs for its own soil. And I think, if we don't transition and start the biological process, it's kind of like the old sustainable agriculture from the 90s. You're doing some good, but you're not making the whole circle.
Well, I've got some fields that's been certified organic since the year 2000, and they're a long way from being what I would call organic soil. They would be a long way from being restored to a condition that would approximate pre-settlement soil condition. So I don't know how long it takes, but I'm pretty darn sure it takes a whole lot longer than 36 months. It probably takes a lot longer than 5 years or 7 years. The concern is that as people feel pressured to transition, maybe you're not motivated by believing in the system. You feel motivated because your farm is in big trouble financially with $3 corn, and you got to do something different. And maybe this is what you got to do. If that is the case, would your success rate be higher if you could have a little more time to figure this out? Or would you just go cold turkey? Now, that's the quickest way, but you got to survive the cold turkey, right? You got to survive that 36 months. You don't survive that, then it doesn't matter. So, and we're not suggesting we replace 36-month transition, only that we offer some options. Another part of that is a transition system that works well for a corn and soybean farm in the Midwest going to be as good working with a dairy in Minnesota or a ranch in Colorado? Should we have regional transitions that address specific needs for specific parts of the country? Would you be more likely to try this if you felt the transition gave you options and was tailored toward the farm that you have, rather than a one-size-fits-all that's supposed to work at the ranch in Colorado just as well as it is on a corn soybean farm in Illinois? So that's a question. It's not a statement. It's a question. What do you think?
Dave, I've often thought when you look at, basically we have multi-generation farmers now that have basically grown up in the farm subsidy program, whether it's Arthur or was set aside acres back in the 60s, or it's a rainbow of subsidies, welfare, call it whatever you want. And it's all my observation of especially if the government or society is saying we want more organic grains, and conventional farmers are looking at this 3-year downside, what's the real cost to our society or government or whatever, that let's just say that the downside is $120 an acre, drop in yield, drop in crop price, whatever. Is that $120 an acre for a farmer, if he enters in the program for a 3-year period or on a sliding scale, a better solution, because it's still it's in a denominator that most conventional farmers understand, if you follow what I'm saying. Whether I'm for or against it, but my observation is the set-aside program back in the 60s got people out of growing too much corn or wheat, or I don't even remember what it was then, but we simply had a situation not too dissimilar to we have today, and they basically paid people not to grow corn or soybeans or whatever. I mean, you guys remember those days, and well, maybe not, but I do.
Yeah, I remember. Pick and roll and set aside, and how many different terms do you remember from?
Has anyone priced CRP payments lately? You know what folks are paying, what FSA is paying for CRP right now? Yeah. So if you heard that, $280 to $350 an acre to not plant or grow. 10-year contract? What are you doing in the 11th year? You're right, Rob. You'll probably fight some weeds, but I will also say that that is one path that Illinois, I think, missed out on. Nebraska, Kansas, across the Dakotas, Iowa. I've seen a tremendous amount of organic production come on from large tracts of ground that had expiring CRP in the last, say, 5 to 10 years. It's a natural way to get into it. Now, and this is a value judgment, but most of the ground that's in CRP across central Illinois should probably stay in CRP today. I'm not advocating that you go and plow up your HEL ground and try to put it in row crops, but it is certainly one way to consider getting some revenue for a while, letting that land rest. And Rob, you're right. You got to get the right covers on it. Some of these pollinator habitats that are really being promoted now will actually give you an additional kicker above the regular CRP contract. The risk that everyone wants to talk about right now is that there's some talk of contamination in some of these cover crop seeds for the pollinators, specifically Palmer. I'm guessing folks have heard of this. So you go out, you're trying to do the right thing for the environment, you're also helping revenue for your farm, and all of a sudden you've got a Palmer amaranth farm going, and that doesn't make you or your neighbors very happy. So be aware where you're getting your seeds, but that's one path.
It's too bad that we couldn't bring those two programs together. We're on year 7. That land goes into alfalfa, or it really would make sense to just try to holistically pull some of this stuff together.
And that's a great idea. You know, a 3-year CRP, a 5-year, a 7-year, take your pick. Point is, there needs to be more options. There needs to be more pathways, and they need to be more tailored toward your individual needs than we have today. And I think that's one area that maybe has had less discussion. We have all these arguments over technicalities and the standards, but we really don't talk about how you get there. And if you don't get there, then what's the point in talking about it? Yes, sir.
Being a professional farm manager in farms in transition and more landowners looking at it, the current farm that I have in transition, the landowners came to me we're in year 2. We'll be certified next year. We've been working on this for 3 years before we even started transition. So I think it's important that anybody that is even considering it, I mean, they have to put a couple years, if they've not been exposed to it, they've got a lot of knowledge to gain before you even do it. You take the time, you get your infrastructure in, your tile, your grain bins. It all takes time like that, and you got to get your soil right to begin with. If you're farming conventionally, you're not going to make it switching to organic. You're going to be broke before you do it. Even start. You need to, because you plan it correctly. I don't think you take a yield loss. You're going to live on conventional commodity prices, but I think you can still get by no different than what we are in conventional commodity price world right now. You're going to make a little bit of money, maybe. You're going to have a learning process, but if you just don't jump in and do it, and if you do, you're
In our transition on our soybean year, we either raise seed or we try and have a contract of some sort with Clear Highland beans. So we don't suffer on the first year. Usually our yields are right up there with, the other yields. Second year, our history has been that we've had vomitoxin in our wheat. And, there was a part of me last year when we had some vomitoxin issues at 5 that Cargill would have been really kind and gave us $1.80 a bushel for, that I thought about I'd be better off if I just put it into a cover crop and get ready for the first year of corn on our first organic year. And, you have to have a landlord who's willing to work with you on that, but there's a lot of ways to go through transition. This year was a good year. Our wheat has no vomitoxin in it. Our transition wheat made what our conventional wheat made, and or not conventional, our organic wheat. And so, we're not going to make a ton of money, but we're not going to go backwards.
And that's part of this process that we were proposing, was that for the first possibly year or 2 years, you make your pick, what you're going to do different, other than just raising non-GMO crops, is you're going to evaluate your land. You're going to create some baseline data, soil tests, whatever. You're going to develop a plan for the next few years. You're going to get educated. You're going to learn as much as you can about what it is you're doing. All of this while you're still doing what you know how to do. When you're pressured to suddenly not only change what you're doing, but you're trying to do something that you don't understand in the first place, and somehow you're expected to get all this done in 36 months or 2 crop years, right? That's asking a lot. That's asking a lot of you, and it's asking a lot of the soil, and it's creating a huge shock to you and to the soil and to the system, and probably to your banker and all the other family members that you have to deal with on your farm, and your landlords and everybody else. It's not just you in a vacuum. So maybe if you have time to get a good rapport with a supportive banker during those first 2 years, that would go a long way. And what if you've got other family members you need to talk this through with? That helps to get things going. If you have landlords, you have to convince them. All this stuff is crammed into an impossibly small space of time. And that's the way you set up a failure. So let's sit down, think this through one more time, try to make it a little more user-friendly to everybody involved, including the soil, and give you a better fighting chance at making it a success. In Logan County alone, we have one landowner with 30,000 acres of farmland is pressuring their tenants to consider organic production. 30,000 acres. A lot of those people don't want to do that. But they're seeing the handwriting on the wall says you can only argue with the landlord for so long. Now what am I going to do? Well, I better understand it, whatever it is. And I better have a reasonably long period of time to get it done if I'm going to have a fighting chance at all.
Thank you very much. Well, my takeaway from this discussion, what keeps coming to mind, is the phrase resiliency through diversity. From both the production aspect, your cropping systems, and even the organic transition system, that when we have options, when we have diversity, we're more resilient. We can carry through. So I want to thank our panel. This has been an absolutely wonderful discussion. So let's give them a round of applause.